and welcome to the Mountainside Podcast. Our guest for this episode is Tyler Sharp. He's a renowned photographer, writer, creative director, conservationist, CEO, and co-founder of the modern Huntsman. I thoroughly enjoyed recording this episode with Tyler. We talked about some of his amazing experiences in Africa, dealing with wildlife and the people there. I really appreciate what Tyler and his Modern Huntsman team is doing in the outdoor space, helping to educate people on the importance of conservation. This is an amazing episode. You do not want to miss any of it, and I hope you enjoy our conversation. Tyler, thanks for joining us. I'm a big fan of your writing, your photography. I think it's incredible what you've done in the past and what you're doing currently. Just stoked to have you on. So thanks for joining us, man.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it, and thanks for bearing with me with the elements and the ambient rain background sounds.
Yeah, for our listeners that are just tuning into this thing, it's not static in the background. It's just Mother Nature. Tyler lives in a remote spot in Livingston, and couldn't fit the mountainside genre, I guess, better than that right there. I mean, that's God's country. I love it up there. It's one of my favorite spots. So. And
there's been a lot of smoke. My best friend and our conservation director, Byron Pace, is here from Scotland. He's here with me for the month, working on a bunch of stuff. And normally there's 3 mountain ranges around my house. You can't see any of them because of all the wildfire smoke. So we're hoping that this rain clears all that out, and we're going to wake up tomorrow and be able to see the mountains again.
Yeah, no joke. I mean, we've been getting smoke from your guys' fires down here as well. It's been pretty bad.
Yeah.
It's amazing how far it travels and how much it'll mess up. I mean, the only good thing about it is some beautiful sunsets, maybe, right?
Yeah.
The winds.
Yeah.
But yeah, other than that, I'm hoping that maybe that'll help with it too.
Absolutely.
For our listeners that don't know who you are, or just tuning into this thing, you're a creative director, writer, photographer, and I hope I'm not butchering that, but it's you've got kind of this weird niche. You don't just specify in one thing. Can you kind of explain to our listeners what you do now and
Sure.
what you've done in the past a little bit?
You know, it's funny. There's really no way to describe it all without sounding totally pompous, right? Because I have done a lot of different things, and I used to get shit on Instagram. People would be like, "Oh, why don't you pick one?" Like, well, I actually do all of these things. So to give you a brief overview, I don't know how many of these things I actually do anymore, but I went to USC, I studied film, I went to film school there, so I learned photography and filmmaking. My first job out of college was in Africa. I moved to Tanzania and started filming outdoor adventures and fishing and hunting and outdoor safaris and things like that. And I've always been a writer, so, I kind of worked producing shows, filming stuff. I was writing a lot of recollections of what I was doing when I was traveling. In that 3-year period when I was working kind of for a booking agent, basically, that booked adventures all over the world, I went to 35 countries in that 3 years. And so really got a lot of experience with travel and adventure and kind of amassed this archive. And then, I grew up in Texas, and my mother's name is Barbie Lee, and I always I'd go to these exotic places, and I would have to, I adopted my storytelling style into a way that I knew my mom would understand and be able to relate to, right? Because what good is wisdom if the common person can't understand it? And so through that experience of trying to communicate the places I'd been, the things I'd seen, and what my thoughts were, that kind of led towards more of a, concise storytelling style. And, I did some commercial directing. I did creative consulting for brands where I would either, be hiring photographers or directors or just giving my ideas based on, and a lot of this was actually because I had gained access to a lot of these exotic places. I could say, hey, X brand, for instance, like Filson, right? I could go take some of that stuff all the way over to, some remote area of Tanzania or Zimbabwe or wherever it was, and be able to shoot stuff in the field where that would have otherwise been super expensive to get a whole crew over there. So I kind of had a long, I was freelance for 15 years and did a lot of that. And then through that whole experience, just kind of started to make observations specifically about hunting and conservation. And in my opinion, I felt like a lot of hunters and a lot of hunting organizations were not doing a very good job of communicating the role that hunting plays in conservation, and also highlighting, the best examples of people who do it, virtuously and ethically and sustainably, all those buzzwords. But on the other side, having gone to college in California and having a lot of friends in urban areas, a lot of them had absolutely zero idea of how it actually works, and their opinions, which were opinions, they were not facts, were based on emotionally sensationalized things they'd seen on social media and online, and not very much it was based on actual experience or the realities of the situation. So that's kind of the underlying impetus that led to creating Modern Huntsman, is trying to bridge that communication gap between hunting's virtues and its role in global conservation compared to what the average person perceives it as, and also trying to highlight a wider range of individuals and organizations and places that we feel like do a good job of upholding that tradition.
I totally love that, man, and I'm behind you 100%. And that's one of the things that we're trying to do here is, just create some awareness, whether you're a hunter or not, what hunting provides, the crucial spot that it holds in the ecosystem currently in this modern day and age, so whether you're a rock climber, mountain biker, or maybe you just like to get outside and hike, whatever, backcountry camping, hunting plays a role in kind of all of that. And we wanted to bring conservation to a whole, we kind of felt like there was maybe this gap there that wasn't filled between what is technical information and what's just general knowledge, and I think a lot of it comes down to education. And that's why I love your approach with Modern Huntsman. Not to mention the publication is incredible. It's like the status of, God, I don't want to compare it to like National Geographic or something like that, but the photos
you can do that
quality. Because National Geographic, in my opinion, is shit on hunting so bad.
They're doing better. They're doing better,
yeah.
And maybe this will make you feel better. But we've gone through a rebranding process in the last year in terms of our tone and our voice and the look and feel and what we're really doing, kind of updating the mission statement. And I had an interview a couple weeks ago with a writer from the New York Times, and she was like, well, can you break it down for me? Like, well, what is it that you guys really think, your vibe is? And I said, well, we're like National Geographic, but we spent a couple nights in jail in Mexico.
Hell yeah.
So, I think, we've had up to this point, over 10 Nat Geo contributors, right? Whether they're photographers or writers. So we are definitely producing work on that level. I'm 100% confident in saying that. I think that what we found is because we aren't beholden to anyone, and we control our own destiny. We don't have to sort of appease any corporate overlords or any shareholders. We're really doing this for the mission and what we believe in. And every conversation we've had with potential partners or potential investors or brand sponsors is very much that look, this is what we're doing, and it's important that you allow us to continue to do what we're doing. And so the design, the photography, the writing, we very much are trying to win awards, not just in a hunting or outdoor space, but in those larger realms. And we're definitely trying to become recognized as a global leader in productive conversations around conservation and allowing people who don't normally have a background in that, or who maybe never saw themselves as a hunter. And we have a lot of people that subscribe to the publication or read our stories online or listen to Byron's podcast that have never hunted, and they probably never will, but they enjoy hearing about the perspectives and the variety of individuals all over the world, and in some cases connection to cultural heritage or even sustenance hunting. That's still very much a thing in today's world, whether people believe it or not.
100%. And I think you guys are well on your way to creating that approach, and it's a great way to do it too. To be able to put a physical book in your hands these days is kind of unheard of, right? Like a lot of the bookstores have closed down, that sort of thing, and this is on that level where you can actually hold it in your hands too, which is cool. So
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not as common, and a lot of people, when we started this 4.5 years ago or whatever it was, a lot of people were like, "You're an idiot, Prince dying," and we didn't say this, but we were all kind of like, "Oh yeah, watch this."
Yeah.
And there's actually kind of a resurgence, and while it's still not as prevalent as it once was, obviously you have to integrate the digital readership into the strategy, but there's a lot of print publications that are still popping up, and I think, and there's a lot of organizations and brands that are producing a print version of, or some of the brands are doing more editorial versions of their catalogs. I don't know how much influence we've had on that, but I'd like to think some, because there's absolutely some that have popped up that happen to may or may not use some of our same writers and photographers and things like that. And great if that means, in my book, if the people that we think should be uplifted are continuing to get work and being recognized for their talents, then that's a win to me.
Yeah, for sure. You travel a lot for this gig, right? I mean, you're constantly on the road, you're at home a little bit. Have you been on any trips lately? I think the last time we talked, we were trying to set this up earlier.
Yeah.
You were just coming back from Tanzania, weren't you?
Mozambique, yeah.
Mozambique, okay, cool.
So in a normal world, I would be moving a lot more than I currently am. 2020 was the first time in 15 years that I didn't leave the country or go to Africa. So that was an interesting exercise in self-awareness, right, with how much of my happiness, balance, well-being comes from traveling, right, meeting new people, seeing new things, getting inspired, and that's a very real thing, and especially here, I mean, people have probably heard the term cabin fever. That's a thing for sure.
Yep.
Trying to battle that, especially in the winter in Montana, to remain active and not get depressed or not get too in your head and all that kind of stuff. So it's nice that things have started to resemble
loosen
back to normal.
up a little bit.
Yeah. So I just went. Yeah, Byron was in Namibia for 5 weeks, and then we met in Mozambique in an area called the Zambezi Delta, which is on the kind of the southeastern coast of Mozambique, and we were actually we went with the Cabela family.
Oh, nice.
Mary and Dan Cabela, obviously they don't operate the store anymore, but they have a family foundation. And 2 years ago, they funded what is now pretty much, cemented as the single largest lion reintroduction program in recent history, maybe ever, that's recorded at least. So they funded the reintroduction of 24 lions into an area of Mozambique where historically there were lions, but they were wiped out from civil war and poaching and just human-wildlife conflict. So that was 2 years ago. Now there's, I don't remember the exact number, but somewhere between 75 and 85. So they've almost quadrupled at this point, and it's an incredibly successful project. They've got them collared, with GPS trackers and all that, so they're able to track the movements. They've been able to track, new prides being formed, cubs being born, and so we actually were with the outfitter, Mark Haldane, and him and his son and their best friend are all helicopter pilots. So they have 3 choppers. And they do a lot of conservation work for other organizations and, collaring and tranquilizing and GPS, all that kind of stuff. So we were going out, we were, flying around trying to find these prides of lion. There's a vet on hand who uses a special mixture based on the size of the animal to tranquilize them. We land the chopper. They were replacing some collars on some of them. In other cases, we were actually collaring the first generation of cubs born in the area. We collared elephants, we collared leopards, and then as a result of the success of this project, they're now reintroducing cheetahs. So
really?
They literally 4 charter planes flew in with 12 cheetahs in crates and all these vets and wildlife researchers and all this kind of stuff. And you can't just release them right away because cheetahs will go back to South Africa or wherever it is. So they built these huge outdoor enclosures that in Africa you call them bomas, which are makeshift fences basically. And they'll stay there. I think we need to check back in, but I believe that they're being released into the wild pretty soon. And traditionally, lions and cheetahs don't get along. Lions kill a lot of cheetahs,
right.
but it's an area of 2.5 million acres. So their hope is that there's enough space for them to successfully coexist and find their own pockets as the population starts to spread. But it's an incredibly successful conservation project, and the outfitters there have done an incredible job of managing that area. It's a hunting area, but when they took over that area, so you lease it from the government about 25 years ago, there was almost no wildlife, again, because of the Mozambique Civil War and poaching, and they have managed to restore and increase the wildlife populations by over 3,000%. It's
incredible. I had no idea that was going on.
Yeah, it's really, really cool. So we were there for 10 days kind of documenting all this, and it was insane because there was another film crew there. There were 4 wildlife biologists. There was 3 generations of the Cabela's family, and just a lot of activity. And we were shooting stories, creating little videos. We were doing podcasts and all that kind of stuff. So that is all stuff that we'll release in this fall in Volume 8, and which is an Africa-themed issue that we'll hopefully be releasing right before Thanksgiving. So that's just got back about a week ago. We had some shoots here in Montana. We're going back to Hungary in the end of September, going back to Africa in October to shoot a little film over there and document some rhino anti-poaching stuff. And somewhere in there, we got to finish the next book and a few other things here and there, but that'll help close.
You're a busy guy, Tyler.
Yeah.
The time that you've spent, you said you went straight out of college and your first job was shooting in Africa?
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct? In Tanzania?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I mean, you must have some incredible stories being out on safari lands like that. I mean, really, from my experience and the one that I did, you cannot go out into some of these spaces or wildlife areas unless you're going with a guide, like on a photography trip or a hunting trip. Were you working for an outfitter then when this was all going on, or how? Yeah. Were you just out there on your own?
No. So I was working for an outfitter and essentially was filming all the clients coming through. And they did all kinds of stuff. It was mostly hunting safaris, but then they also did fishing, like tiger fishing on the Zambezi. They did Kilimanjaro safaris. They did photographic stuff. They did cultural immersions where they'd go spend time with the Maasai tribe or the Kikuyu or something like that. And we would sort of create these encapsulating experiential videos or books kind of thing. And so that's kind of how I dipped my toes into it. But I think what's so interesting about and unique about what I got to do is that most people who go to Africa, they're on a photographic safari or an eco-tourism safari or something like that. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's a limited experience because in most cases you can't get out of the vehicle, right? And you're limited to, and a lot of times it's places like the Serengeti or Ngorongoro or Kruger National Park or Victoria Falls, there's a lot of people there. And there's a lot of vehicles, and in some cases, the animals have actually become habituated to the presence of humans. And I'll never forget, I saw in the Serengeti one time a leopard stalking behind a Land Cruiser and then jumping on a zebra because it knew the zebra couldn't see it, and it used the vehicle as a shield.
Yeah.
Versus the game reserves in the sustainably managed hunting areas, there's nobody else there. And it's sometimes 3 million, 4 million acres. And you're driving around and you see tracks and you get out of the vehicle and you start tracking the buffalo or, whatever it is. And so I was kind of thrust, there's no barrier there. There's no veil between you and the food chain. And so I learned pretty quickly.
Literally thrown to the lions.
Oh, totally. And there, I had a handful of really close encounters and,
really,
I had them come into my tent and breathe on my neck and charge and all kinds of crazy stuff. But that's just part of it. And I think that, it's such a reminder, experiences like that. And you don't have to be hunting to have an experience like that, right? You can still, there are some places where you can go do walking safaris. And of course you would have to have a guide. But situations like that, those really close encounters, that's really what, stokes the fire or kind of reminds you of your human nature and your part in the natural order, not a separation from it. And I feel like you don't always get that.
It puts it in perspective.
Yeah, and I feel like you don't always get that when you're sitting in a photographic vehicle, 10 yards from a lion who's napping and you're just, taking a bunch of photos of it. It's not the same thing. That's still incredible and it's still an experience that you should do if you can, but just know that there's more than that, and that, it's one piece of the conservation puzzle.
I mean, that happens right here in the West, like the town that we're in, specifically in Evergreen. The elk are so domesticated that they'll just hang out, and they hang out on a golf course all day, eating lush green grass. The big bulls automatically move in on the opening day of archery season, like they know it's coming.
Yep.
They're super smart, and then you can be out in a wilderness area like the flat tops that's 10,000 plus acres and not even see an elk. If you're backcountry bow hunting or something. So all depends on pressure and how much range they have and what they're used to, I guess. Being in Africa that long, and you said you had lions breathing on your neck, do you have a moment that was a super close call with where you were staring death in the face, or
100%.
thought you might be?
Multiple times.
Yeah.
So the one in particular, and I actually published this story in volume 1 of Modern Huntsman. So in our first issue, I wrote this story about.
I think I read about this. This is incredible.
Yeah, it's called Imara Kama Simba, which means Swahili. It means strong like a lion kind of thing, and that's a phrase that has a lot of meaning for me in other areas. But in this case, we were in south central Tanzania. It's called the Kilimanjaro floodplains, and it is so hot there that you can't sleep with the tent closed, the canvas door closed, and so there's a mesh door, but the zipper was broken, so the zipper was wide open. And anyways, this was the last time that I ever took malaria medication, because sometimes it can give you nightmares and bad dreams and just hallucinations and things like that. So I woke up in the middle of the night. It's probably like 3 a.m. having some sort of murderous nightmare. I was sweating and my heart was beating, and I kind of calmed down and realized it was just the malaria medication. And then a couple minutes later, I heard, which is a male lion right behind the tent. And the PH, right, the professional hunter and guide, is asleep in the bed next to me in the tent. There's like 3 beds in there, and he's snoring. And of course, my bed is by the door. And so I, kind of take inventory real quick, because this door is wide open. And I'm like, all right, do I have time to get up, run out there, untie the flaps, roll both down, jump back in, zip the zipper? And by the time I even thought to do that, he called right next to my head outside the window.
Oh, God.
And at that point, there was no way, because, he was right there. And so, and it was a full moon. And I always forget to tell this part of the story, but that day, it was so hot, and my friend Georgie, I was like, I can't take this anymore. I just need to shave my head. It's too hot. And he's like, well, let's do a mohawk first. So I was like, all right, fine. I mean, I don't have to see my mom or anything. So we were in the middle of the bush. So we shaved a mohawk into my hair. And so,
So it looks just like a zebra mane.
Yeah, pretty much. And so this lion is next to my head, and I'm like, all right, well, here we go. And he comes around the front of the tent and steps out into the full moonlight about probably 8 yards in front of me. And the biggest lion I've ever seen. I mean, it's, he probably easily could have been 600 pounds and looked like a centaur. I mean, his shoulders were super tall, and he had a mohawk mane. And so,
my God.
Yeah. And so, I basically, my plan was, I was going to reach down and grab the bed frame, so that if he actually decided to charge, I was just going to try to flip the bed on top of myself and hopefully stop him, and then maybe Georgie would wake up and we figure something out. But as I leaned down to grab the bed frame, it's like a horror movie. The bed creaked. It was like,
oh my God.
And he just turns around and looks me straight in the eyes. And so, I mean, I'll never forget that image. I'm crouched down holding the bed frame, and there's a massive male lion in the full moonlight, crouching and staring me straight in the eye. And I could hear, it was so, because when a lion shows up, everything else goes silent. All the birds, all the bees, everything stops. It gets completely still. I could hear the sand as he dug his paws and started to crouch down, and his tail started doing the flick thing. And I was like, okay, here we go. This is how I die right now. And, it felt like forever, but it was probably It's probably 10 seconds maybe. He turned around and went over to the fence and like rubbed his face on the fence and then jumped in the river and swam across. And I, was like, Georgie, wake up, that lion was here. And he woke up and, gets his gun and, we're both like headlamps and looking around and, found his tracks. I mean, it was massive tracks. And, anyways, he left and we could hear him roaring, miles away as he explored the rest of his territory. And so fast forward, next full moon, next safari, there's a different client there. Same tent, same lion comes back. But this time, the door's closed. Yeah. The door's closed this time. The canvas was closed. I was like, you know what? I don't care if it's hot because I don't really want to die from a lion coming in here. So anyways, he lays on the front porch and leans on the tent, and his body is sagging the tent wall in. And he's just panting, like, like breathing and just hanging out on the front porch. And I mean, his like massive body is bulging through the front door of the tent. And I was like, should I just poke him?
Right.
And so at that point, I kind of decided that he was my spirit animal, and he was just coming back to hang out and remind me, especially because we both had mohawks.
Let you know your place in nature.
Yeah. And he hung around for a little while longer. Basically, he, because there's a skinning shed in the camp where we keep meat from the buffalo or the plains game that we had hunted, and that's what you eat when you're in the middle of nowhere. There's no grocery stores. So he was coming to try to get a free snack. And we heard from some of the other camp staff, some of the local guys, that he had come sniffing around and kind of, scared them all and made them jump onto vehicles and climb up trees and hide in the sheds and stuff. So he was, and that's where things can become a problem, right? When they start to do that. And fortunately, he didn't stick around. Otherwise, sometimes you got to make a tough decision before, because ultimately, if you don't do something, he'll end up killing someone.
Yeah.
So he moved on.
It's an easy meal.
Yeah. So he moved on, which was great, but obviously not without making a few cameos. So.
Oh my God, that is terrifying. I mean, I just put it in perspective. Like mountain lions don't have shit on what you just told me in some of my experiences. What I thought was a hairy experience for me isn't even close to what you just explained.
And you could probably fight off. You could probably fight off a mountain lion. Yeah,
but my goodness, man, that's insane. I just think about what a house cat can do to you. So imagine what a full-grown lion could do. Especially with their same mannerisms and stuff. That is insane. Did you have any close encounters with poachers? I mean, that was one thing I wanted to touch with you because of what hunting does to help prevent poaching. Or illegal hunting, rather.
Yeah.
But did you have any close encounters with that? Because I know that there can be all, shootouts and.
Oh, I got shot at on my first day.
No.
Yeah, literally the first day we went out. I'm totally green. I mean, I spent time in the wilderness, but this was my first actual day in the bush on a hunting safari in Africa. And we leave camp and we went out to look for buffalo. So, they'd go check specific areas, or they'd go to the village and ask, like, hey, have you seen them? Or ask the cattle herdsmen, like, where are these guys? And so anyways, we leave camp, and it was less than 2 miles, and they slam on the brakes, and, they start shouting in Swahili. Everybody gets all, angry and jacked up, and they start, getting out rifles and loading rounds in, and they turn to me, and they're like, Tyler, turn the camera off. And they hand me a 375. And we start, because they found tracks for poachers, and so we started tracking these guys. And we come over a ridge, and they immediately start shooting at us. They were just waiting for them to catch up. And, then it seemed very intense, and I, hit the deck. I'm like, they're shooting at us. And in retrospect, and now also having had a lot more experience and been in a lot sketchier situations than that, they're just laying cover fire down so that they can get away.
Really? Okay.
But absolutely, people die every year from poachers, and I think that it's complex, right? Because a lot of the reason people do that is desperation, right? Hunger, starvation, survival. But now with ivory poaching and rhino horn poaching, there's highly organized and very, very well-funded tactical poaching groups funded by, not to just point the finger just at Chinese syndicates, but that's the majority of it because of the demand for rhino horn. And so this is black ops kind of stuff. And, they're getting a guy who normally would make $1,500 in a year is getting offered $10K, to not show up to his rhino watching post or whatever it is, So there's a wide range of, of situations, but at the end of the day, there's just so many people, right? There's massive population explosions, and I mean, not just in Africa, all over the world, right? The growing population of humans on the planet puts a demand and a strain on wildlife resources. And one of the main issues over there is the wildlife corridors, right? So areas that were once wild, people are moving into them and creating farms and villages. That's interrupting elephant, migration patterns, lions, leopards, all this kind of stuff. And, and a lot of the common criticisms is, why shouldn't, Africans be allowed to hunt for food? And in a lot of cases, they can with regulation, but if it's not regulated and it's not managed appropriately, it'll get wiped out.
Right.
Very quickly. And so it becomes a land use situation, right? There's only so many ways you can use land. And it's tricky. It's different in every country. The regulations are different. And, most of, those, different tribes and things like that, for centuries or however long, right, they were living off the land, and now the land has changed and it's harder to do that. And there's also many, many more people competing for the same resources. And so, it's very complex. And, I think that a lot of the anti-poaching guys who put their lives on the line to go out and protect wildlife or stop this stuff from happening were previously poachers. And you ask most of them, and most of them would say because they were hungry or they needed to feed their family, or, in some cases an elephant destroyed their crop and that was their entire year's livelihood. And so they had to turn to other methods, and that bushmeat happened to be one that they knew how to do and there was a market for. So.
Sure. And then is there involvement from like a African federal level or anything like that helps regulate that, or anti-poaching?
It depends on the country. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
But it's different country to country, but basically in national parks, it's a lot more common that it's a government supplied anti-poaching team. A lot of the hunting areas, it's the obligation of the outfitter to implement their own operations, which is very expensive.
Yeah.
But it's, if you're gonna operate a hunting area, it's in everyone's best interest to do that in an effective way that increases the wildlife.
Yeah.
And if people are poaching it, that's essentially taking away your ability to do that. And so, it's dangerous, it's expensive, and it's difficult to do. And in our experience,
moving parts there,
Yep. And in my experience, and in the experience of, the dozens of outfitters I've worked with over the years, that it will not ever be successful unless you have the full cooperation, buy-in, and participation of the local community. It's just that's the bottom line. And so there has to be ways where the local community, the villagers, the tribes, whatever it may be, they have to benefit from that, and not only just benefit from it, but be a part of it. And that's a big part of what they're doing in the Zambezi Delta, is that they've implemented a really, really cool community program where rather than the villages be all spread out, they had this sort of council together, and they said, hey, look, we want to help you guys with an agricultural operation. So they found an area that was suitable for farming, and using some of the dollars brought in from some of the hunting. They bought a tractor, they bought a bunch of rice, they helped plow. Each family got 5 acres. They got in beehives. They've put in a a mill to grind corn into maize flour,
which is probably making their life incredibly easier. Being
very
in a third
much
world
so.
Country,
There was no school, there was no well, there was no clinic, there was nothing. And so now, and then they do meat drops. So they'll take meat from buffalo or different plains game, and they'll go drop it off in the villager. There's a guy. His name's now I can't remember his name. Zachariah, and he's the head of the community program. So it was an interesting experience when we show up with a truck full of meat, and everybody's gets all excited and almost in a feeding frenzy. And so Zachariah is kind of distributing the meat based on families and sort of there's sort of a pecking order and who got what last time. And but it was pretty cool because everybody, you talk about basic needs, they have all of those are being met, and they understand that the reason that's able to happen is because of the abundance of wildlife. And if everybody went out on their own and hunted or poached indiscriminately and were shooting females or young ones or whatever that was, then that's not going to be able to happen. And so there's an educational component to just about sustainability and regenerative use. And so I think that's what was really interesting about this last trip there.
That makes a lot of sense. That's incredible, man. I'm glad that you shared that with us. You live in Montana now. Are you originally from there, or why Montana? Is that? I mean, sure. I know why, but
yeah,
some people may not.
So I grew up in Texas, a combination Austin when I was younger, and then Dallas Fort Worth. So Grapevine is where I grew up, and then I lived in Dallas proper for 14 years. Wasn't there all the time. It's a great home base in terms of being able to travel internationally. I had a lot of family there. My mother and her parents, my grandpa was a cowboy, and so I was always around horse culture and Texas history and all that kind of stuff. And so my dad and his best friends started fishing in Montana in, 1979, 1980, something like that. And it was like an annual guys trip they would do. And about 15 years ago, they invited my brother and I to join the trip. So I think the first time would have been, maybe that's not 15 years, so 2010, so whatever that is, 11 years.
Yeah, 11 years.
And obviously was blown away by it, and 4 days wasn't enough. So the next year I would just plan to stay a little bit longer, and I'd rent a car and go off and explore by myself. And then the next year it was like 2 weeks, and then I started to make friends, and turned into a couple months, and then I'd be staying for 6 months. And about 3 years ago, just decided, to not leave. And it was also kind of ironic because I was running a media company and a publication based around hunting and fishing, and I wasn't really doing that. And there's places that do that in Texas, but not like here. And
yeah, it's a whole nother level.
And it's a different type of hunting. There's not a whole lot of public land in Texas close to the Dallas area. So yeah, I think it just made sense. And obviously there's a lot of conservation groups and outdoor related brands, in Montana. And so, just kind of made sense. And so I kind of split time back and forth, and, usually between Dallas, Livingston, and East Africa, it's kind of my circuit. And then maybe 10% of the other time is random places with assignments or speaking events or whatever else is going on.
That's great. We have some mutual friends, and actually a friend recommended that I interview you, and I'm glad that he turned me on to you. Andy Arabito.
Oh, yeah.
Great dude. I've known him for quite a while. But you've always shot photography and film growing up, or was that something that, what made you fall into that specific niche?
I mean, I always did art. I always drew, and I did a lot of collage. I would just tape stuff into notebooks and paint on it and chuck it in the bathtub and get it wet and see what happened. And then once the ink would bleed, I did a lot of weird stuff like that. And then in high school, I think it was the end of my sophomore year, a teacher said, "Hey, we're launching a new class called Electronic Media Art, and we think you'd be interested in it. Do you want to try it?" And so that would have been 1999, 2000, something like that. And basically it was, Photoshop, Adobe Premiere, those types of things when they were still pretty young. It was still the old pre-OS X operating system on Mac, so It was still like the old interface. and all of that. So I forget what version of Photoshop it was, but I think it was like a Photoshop 4 or something like that. It was pretty early on. And I guess my frustration with drawing and painting is that I always had these images in my head, and I never could really exactly capture what it was. And so once I just kind of discovered, in particular, digital photography and photo manipulation and all that, I kind of opened some doors and ended up entering some art competitions and actually won the state of Texas art competition.
Oh, nice.
With something I created. And I think I won, $100 or $150. But I remember when they handed me that cash, I was like, oh, I wonder if this is something I should think about. And I think this just kind of led to that, and just really got into the practice of creating work and learned the tools really well. And I don't know if I've ever shared this on a podcast before, but I kind of have like a tech geek background. I actually used to work at CompUSA and was like an Apple certified technician.
You were the dude, huh? Fix this.
So then everybody like, oh, well, I got my emails not working, so can you help me with that? And so anyways, I think that's kind of what led to the interest in filmmaking and digital medias. And so I ended up going to USC. And, of course, whatever strategy.
Do you have a military background, knowing Andy, or I was curious on that too? Okay.
No, I don't. My grandfather was a Marine. My life dream growing up was to go into the SEALs. So I definitely, I had all the gear. My neighbor was an ATF agent. I had read all the books. I knew exactly what had to happen. And that was kind of what I wanted to do. And obviously ended up going to art school instead. Right. So slightly different. I played sports. I played lacrosse in college and stuff like that. But no, never actually went into service. But I have a lot of friends who are SEALs or Marines and things like that. So, I certainly have a huge respect and appreciation for that. But, life took a slightly different path there. So
sure. I just wasn't sure on that. That was something I wanted to ask. Yeah. Man, we are burning through the time. I could record with you for a long time, but I want to hit some of these bullet points that are on my list. And, I want to talk about conservation with you because I think that your values and how you portray hunting and modern huntsmen in general and your guys' team, it's very much in alignment with how I feel personally.
Sure.
So I would love for you to dive into kind of your guys' take on conservation and some of the key roles that you think that we can do to help preserve, public land, waterways, wildlife for future generations. Because me growing up in Colorado, my family homesteaded the town that I'm in now.
Wow.
And hunting and fishing has just always been a part of our life, our culture, and it's been passed down through generations. So I hold it to a very high value and a very high standard. And it's one of the most important things to me each year is to go hunting. And I think that I didn't really realize it until I had kids, but I think I learned some life lessons from it, some values. It definitely put an emphasis on what it is to take a life and to see something, expire. And then, right down to the point to where you're putting it on your dinner plate on your table. Mm-hmm. So it's super important to me. And I just want that to stick around for future generations.
Sure.
And that's one of the reasons why I started this podcast is I want my son's grandchildren, to be able to experience the same things. Mm-hmm. And I just feel like right now, currently, especially in the state of Colorado, because we're, the population's 6 million people, the pandemic is hit, and people are recreating a lot more. They're picking up new hobbies. They're picking up fly fishing, and some of the regulations in Colorado are pretty lean, and that's up to wildlife biologists and stuff. But, the rivers and streams are just getting hammered like 24 hours a day. Some of the spots that we used to go fish as a kid, the trout are totally depleted. People are fishing when it's too hot, and then that just trickles down to hunting is a little bit more regulated, and I think people pay a little bit more attention to that. But still, it's the same thing, just the frequency that the wildlife's seeing here because people are out, and then that diminishes, calf returns and that sort of stuff. But yeah, I really like your guys' take, your approach, and what it's doing to help educate people that may not ever think about hunting. So I definitely want to spend some time on that with you and what you guys feel is the most important key parts of that. So.
Wow, thank you. I appreciate it. And you're right about all of that. And, this is, I feel like I've done a good job. If I've done a good job of anything, it's just finding really smart people and convincing them to come be a part of this. and I think that, somebody like Byron Pace, who, has he literally called me the first day we launched the Kickstarter from Scotland. And he was like, what is this and how can I be a part of it? And he's been a part of it ever since. And so,
I'm going to slow you down here for just 1 minute. Byron he's the CEO
He's our conservation director.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, if you want to, in terms of who does what, so I'm the head idiot, right? So I'm owner, CEO, editor,
it takes
in chief,
a team, right? It takes
marketing
a
director, all these things. But Byron is absolutely, when it's facts based, when it's science based, when it's articulate policy, that's all Byron. And I've learned a lot from him. His podcast, it's called Into the Wilderness. He's had some incredible people on there, and he's super generous about that too. So that's something, if you ever want to get introduced to one of his guests or something like that, we'd love to make that happen. But I think that what it comes down to for me is just constructive conversation, right? I think that, I don't know at what point it happened, right? But when the hunting community and the anti-hunters just kind of started to bash each other, all productivity went out the window, or most of it at least. And I know that that's difficult, and that's a larger issue online and in life right now, is people being able to have, nonpartisan conversations about anything,
Yeah.
And I think that that's really what our main goal was, right? Was to create a platform and a forum that would allow for that to happen, and kind of not take any bullshit in terms of when someone shows up on our account and starts making comments or blasting them. Like, we call them out pretty quick, and I'll tag a couple people, and we'll, with a diplomatic tone, dismantle them. And not that it's about dismantling, but you can tell pretty much if someone's just trying to pick a fight, or they're just angry or emotional about something, like, that's not doing anybody any good. So if you don't have something constructive or inquisitive or to say, like, I don't know, I don't want to say that's not welcome, but it's not really. And so I think when it comes down to the future of conservation and how we do that, I think it's just a matter of open-mindedness and understanding and empathy for, honestly, the most conflict I've seen is within the hunting industry itself. It's like, oh, well, you're a poser because you wear this hat, or like you're not hardcore because you don't wear this brand of camo, or whatever. It's stupid. And I think that that dissension amongst the same, what should be, community pointed in the same direction, has allowed all of this other detraction to occur, and all these other organizations to kind of, put hunting down in the public's eye. And so I think that's really our main point and goal, right, is to try to move past that and ideally kind of point out the childlike nature of it. It's really, it's immature and it's not productive, and it's creating a situation where the future of hunting could potentially be at stake, and not as much in the U.S., right, but in places like the UK, where Byron's from, there's regulations being passed that are making it hard to do things the way that they've always done it, and that is 100% based on public perception, and that's voters, or politicians taking advantage of voters' perceptions of things, often swayed by emotion, or people not being responsible, ethical hunters and coming in and doing something dumb and then putting it on social media, and that then becomes fodder for all these anti-hunting groups and spread globally within seconds.
Yeah, from my perspective, I see that a lot. I think that the general public, or the world's public, views hunters as that trophy hunter that's standing on the neck of a dead animal that's got blood all over it in a photo, right? It's kind of that old school mentality, and they see, not that you're not excited and you don't want to get a picture with whatever you've just harvested or killed, or however you want to say that, but I think that some of it comes down to the hunter's responsibility too, right? To how you portray yourself, and thinking about how it's going to impact other people that have never even seen that, right?
Yeah. And that's hard, right? Because there's some of our critics have said, oh, you guys are softening hunting, or you're bowing to the left, or whatever it is. And it's like, okay, well, should we all be able to post whatever we want all the time? Maybe. Does it have consequences? Yeah. And I think that's something that just because you want to do something doesn't mean you should be able to, especially when you represent a massive demographic of people, and there's consequences for that. So I think that it's just ultimately about, what are you really in this for? Are you in this for, selfish promotion of your conquests? Or are you in this for the tradition of hunting and our ability to continue to do this? And for whatever reason it is you do it, right? Because even the guy who is a trophy hunter, yeah, maybe you don't agree with his motives, right?
Sure.
But guess what? There's systems in place, particularly in Africa, that make those people pay a lot of money, and that money goes to the right places to pay for conservation. So do I agree with just wanting to do that all the time? Not necessarily, but there's still a place for that, right?
And there's
versus somebody who just wants
good.
to hunt for food, right? And that's fine too. But there's also versions of hunting where it's not just about food, right? Sometimes there's wildlife management, and then there's also some people who want to hunt and they don't ever pull the trigger or release the arrow, and that's fine too. It's all part of the same thing, and everybody does it for different reasons. And I think that that's what's dangerous, is when these factions have formed in the hunting industry. It's like, oh, well, if you're not doing it for this, then you're bad, or if you're not this, then you're not hardcore, and if you're not doing it for this, then you're a liberal, or whatever it is, right?
Right.
It's made it difficult for the type of people, because if hunting's going to survive, more people, it's not like we have to have tons of more hunters, right? Because there is a glass ceiling there, but people have to be okay with it, and it has to remain relevant in the public's eyes in terms of why it should stick around. And I think that the answer of sustenance hunting isn't always valid, right? I mean, you and I could go to the grocery store if we wanted to. That's a choice. In the same way people make a choice to be vegan or a choice to be vegetarian, we make a choice to go out and do it ourselves and have a connection to the food and understand where it came from and take responsibility for that. And that's fine if somebody doesn't want to do that, but don't point your finger and say someone's evil if you don't understand the reality of the situation. And I think, COVID was really interesting to see a lot of people get caught flat-footed and be like, oh, shit, you mean I can't go buy the Wagyu beef thing that I wanted because it's gone? Yeah. And we actually saw quite a bit of interest from people saying, hey, you know what? I'm a little more interested in sourcing my own food, and even if that doesn't mean they hunt themselves, but they're sourcing it from a company. We do a lot of work with Maui Nui Venison, and they're a great example of they're doing sustainable population management of axis deer in Maui, and they've gotten USDA approval to where you could order it to your doorstep. So if you don't want to hunt, but you want to eat wild game, or you want to know where it came from and that it was done respectfully, perfect example. And there's lots of those. And I think that, being able to, and maybe this is a stretch, but in my opinion, that's a way to help ensure that conservation and all this stuff continues, is to be able to make smart choices like that and support the right people, and just be educated, right? And understand the complexities of these situations, and that it's not always just black and white. And, I think that part of our main goal is to make it more accessible, right? To someone who lives in, somebody who lives in Portland or Chicago or New York or wherever it is, would be interested in reading this book, listening to the podcast, subscribing to our newsletter, whatever it is, because we're not just talking about stories from the field. We're talking about a lot of different things that is, relevant to a modern world and the survival of wildlife and wild places. And that's not just about hunting but
I think another key role too. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. I was just saying, just like you said, with fishing and water health and land management, all of those things are much bigger picture. So,
100%. I think another thing too that I've noticed recently, and maybe it really perked my ears up to it. Colorado recently just voted in wolf reintroduction here. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of debate on that, and it was a close, it was very close to the ballot box. But I think a lot of it comes down to actually listening to wildlife biologists and people
Yeah.
that are experienced in this, right? And their educated decisions to make yours if we're going to have biological issues at the ballot box, basically.
Yeah.
I don't think that ballot box biology is necessarily the way to figure it out just because,
Nope.
One group of people decides, or the greater group of people decides that this is the best choice.
Right.
I think that, it should be left up to biologists.
Agreed. And I think that was a dangerous initiative or, slippery slope, because I would say that the majority of people participating in that vote do not have the facts, and they also don't have perspective on both sides, right? They're making that decision based on, in most cases, probably an emotional attachment to an animal or not.
Yeah.
Right? And it's very complex, and I would never pretend to be an expert on wolf reintroduction, but we work with people who are and are very, very educated. They're at the forefront of those conversations. And, I always tell them when people bring stories to me of that nature, I say, okay, do you know someone who's smarter than you or has more information on this? Because if you do, you need to go find them, because I don't want to catch hell because you didn't do your research or gather the facts. And so, but I agree with you 100%. It's got to be based on science and conservation, and it's dangerous to put that out to a public that doesn't necessarily have all the information.
We did 3 full episodes on that reintroduction, before it went to the ballot box, just trying to educate people. I never stated my opinion, and I got more hate mail over that than I have. I'm still getting it over it, like people that have listened to it. But it's just wild to me that people would vote on some. I mean, I can understand it, but I think you should be educated in something before, or look into it a little bit just before you make your decision. And that was all I was asking anybody to do.
I would be curious to know how much of that hate mail, of the people who actually wrote that mail, have actually had or lived and had interactions with wolves.
I would bet 0, just judged on reading what they wrote and, how they were explaining whatever death threats I was getting at the time.
Totally. Oh yeah.
But it blew my mind.
That's a big thing with elephants, right? In Africa, and we've been working with African government leaders, the president of Botswana, and director of ministry and tourism in Namibia, and all these places, and it's a form of neo-colonialism of Western people telling them, oh well, you should or shouldn't do this with elephants, or you shouldn't be allowed to hunt them, or they shouldn't be allowed to eat them. Well, these governments and these African nations are like, don't tell us what to do with our wildlife. Like you want them, you put them in your backyard, see what happens. And and so I think that's just a dangerous mentality and that's ultimately what we all have to kind of gut check ourselves on, is do we really understand where these folks are coming from, and do we know what it's like to have a herd of cattle that gets preyed upon by wolves, or vice versa? What sort of impact does that have on all the other species? And do we want wolves there because we like them, or is it actually going to be good for, the whole ecosystem? And so, I mean, those are all
another really
complex
good
answers.
Point. Another really good point that came up is, is it fair to the wolf? You're dropping. There's going to be human conflict and interaction with these wolves. You're dropping them in a state that has 6 million people in it. And I think the population of like Wyoming, where a majority of the wolf population is now, is, I don't even think it compares to one of our suburb cities in population for the entire state. So there's a lot of conflict there too. So, but I don't want to make this all doom and gloom, and we've beat that up for forever. But I thought it was important, and I think that hearing it from you too kind of validates it for me. So. But let's talk about the modern Huntsman before we jump off here.
Sure.
You cover all kinds of different subjects in that. It's not just conservation, which I think is really cool. How many volumes are out currently, and what are some of the titles of those?
Sure. So we just released our 7th book, and just for anyone listening who's not familiar with what we do, it's a magazine, but it's not. It's a 250 to 300 page book, but it's not hardcover, so you can't always say book. That's why we say publication. It's people are so ready to jump on you for terminology. So we just finished number 7. That was a water themed issue. So we talked about a lot of what you're referring to with trout streams and things like that. We talked about spearfishing and salmon runs and Byron did something about sustainability of salmon in Scotland. We did waterfowl stuff. We did a story with Maui Nui and basically how these axis deer populations in Maui, because they don't have predators and they've gone unchecked for so long, they're damaging the ecosystems, and it's destroying native plants, which is causing erosion that's affecting the health of the reefs. So it's a whole cycle of
trickle
things.
Down, yeah.
Yep. And so, but the other issues, the first one we released, 4 years ago or whatever that was, didn't have a theme. It was just it just had 20 stories from 10 different contributors that were all friends and allies of ours. The second book was a public lands issue, and not just public lands in the United States, but we actually talked about what is land access like in other parts of the world. It's different in New Zealand than it is in Argentina versus England and Austria, all these different places. The third book was a wildlife management one where we dove into some pretty sticky stuff. I mean, we talked about grizzly bears and polar bears and all kinds of things, and the difference between what is considered a pest in certain parts of the world, right? We may consider rats a pest, but in other countries they love them. And you go to Pennsylvania and whitetails might be considered a pest. There's different perceptions of that. Our fourth book was actually a women's issue. It was all 100% about women in hunting, conservation, and ranching all over the world, which was so much fun. And the last thing I wanted to do was put an issue out about the struggles and conflicts women deal with and pretend like I know what the hell I'm talking about. So we brought in a couple of our friends, 4 women who are all just incredibly smart and talented to take the reins on that one. And that was 272 pages. That was wow. One of the biggest ones we've done. That's been sold out for a little while. We're definitely trying to get that reprinted. We did an issue on traditions last spring in the sense of, we use that word lightly. Traditions can mean lots of things. There's a lot of traditions surrounding hunting. In some countries, it's very cultural based versus here in the United States, it may be like a hunting tradition you have with your grandfather where you went out on opening day and you guys, you had a specific breakfast or whatever it was. That was really interesting. And we also kind of examined, like, there's probably some traditions that maybe shouldn't stick around, right?
Right.
In modern world, just
no,
because
that was
it's a tradition.
Great volume. Yeah,
oh,
it was
thanks.
really good. Yeah.
And then we released an issue appropriately during the height of COVID about resilience, and just tried to make one that was a little more, I don't want to say uplifting, but kind of. We wanted to tell stories that were just about people doing incredible things and inspiring and reminding you of why it's worth continuing to fight for all this stuff. And so that was amazing, but definitely still a hard year. And then obviously we just released this last one, and the one we'll release in the fall is Africa. And then, but in between there, we've got a ton of stories and recipes and podcasts, and we're releasing some films and some things this year. So lots to read and watch and listen to.
Awesome. Really looking forward to that. Go ahead and drop the website. You guys have an Instagram, I know, too, that I follow that's got some great photos on it and short stories and all kinds of different stuff. So
yeah. So it's just modernhuntsman.com, and that's HUNTSMAN. And, we specifically chose that word because the word hunter, if you say it without context in a public setting, sometimes has a negative connotation. And the word huntsman is obviously an old world word that meant somebody who knew the ways of the woods. They were typically multifaceted. They, knew how to track. They knew woodcraft. They knew hunting, yes, but it was a wide range of things, And so I think that we wanted that to represent something a little more, and then pair that with the word modern, and that's kind of, we're pulling from these old traditions, but then finding a way that it stays relevant in the modern world.
That's interesting. That's really cool. Thanks for sharing that. I didn't really think about it that way, but
yeah.
Oh, that's great. Do you, you being a writer, do you have any influences that kind of carved or you try to mimic in your writing or anything like that?
Sure. I would say philosophically Joseph Campbell.
Okay.
is probably my main influence in terms of the way he viewed world cultures. And
correct me if I'm wrong. He did a lot on religion, right? And the variations between religion.
Mythology and religion,
okay.
right?
Yeah.
And basically how and the misinterpretation of the word mythology, right? When a lot of people hear that word that means fake, but really that's a narrative that gives meaning. And so in a sense, a lot of by Joseph Campbell's definition, the Bible, those stories are part of our mythology, of a Western mythology. And so it's basically just this incredible, he was so knowledgeable about connecting the dots between all these cultures and religions and tribes all over the world, and how ultimately there's many of the same themes. And it's just kind of has a unifying effect on the human experience. And it's been really inspirational to me, especially being able to go to remote places and meet people and be, experience some of these cultural ceremonies and things that I have over the years. And so that is one. Peter Beard was a huge influence of mine, who sadly passed away last year. And he was famous. He was a photographer, but he was very famous for his large-scale multimedia collages, where he would mix, photos and found objects and often his own blood and things like that. And he, was based in Nairobi in Kenya, and that was always something that was very inspirational to me, style-wise. And I do a lot of that myself in my own journals. And but yeah, in terms of style of writing, I don't know. I think that I have a less traditional approach to it. Obviously, I use Hemingway as an example, not of the way I want to write, but in the way that somebody who's not a hunter, you could say, could still be into Hemingway, because Hemingway did a good job of presenting a lifestyle, the sporting lifestyle, in a way that the average person who doesn't hunt or may never be able to live that style of life still thought that was cool.
Right.
And I think that's also a key to the success of, the future of hunting and fishing and conservation. It has to remain relevant. And the easiest way for something to remain relevant is if people think it's cool.
Right.
And
I think conservation's done that too. I mean, conservation 100 years ago meant something totally different than probably what it does today.
Yeah. But I would say that, without being able to name a specific writer off the top of my head, I would say that the style of storytelling that I try to pursue, like I mentioned earlier, is one that is, something that my mother would be able to understand, right? And something that, because I've been very fortunate to get to travel and see a lot of different places, that I find it's part of my responsibility to sort of relay that information or be an ambassador for different parts of the world or whatever that is. And so, I think from the beginning, this has always been a global thing for us. It's not just about North America. It's about global conservation issues and also what it's like to go to other countries, and what is hunting like there, and what is their relationship to it and participation in it. And most places in the world, people are still hunting, and they've been doing it the same way they've been doing it forever. And we think we're all fancy and cool in the U.S. with all this technical gear, and
$500 camo pants.
These guys are like wearing sandals and smoking cigs on the mountain,
right,
with a smoothbore shotgun, and they're like, whoa, yeah. So.
Yeah, I love that stuff. We've had a couple guests on from, like Alone and stuff. Donnie Dust is one of them, and he's very primitive in his way of hunting, like makes his own bows, his own arrowheads, everything like that. Just a different approach to show you that you don't need much to survive out there as long as you know what you're doing. And we've talked to a lot of foragers too, mushroom hunters, that sort of thing, plant eaters and stuff like that. So there's so much crazy information out there nowadays.
Absolutely.
And that's one great thing about the internet and Instagram and all these things. Is it's giving people a platform that you probably wouldn't have heard of, 30, 40 years ago.
Absolutely.
Like I love your photography. I strongly suggest that you go check out Tyler's website. It's just tylersharp.com, correct?
Yeah. I can't promise how updated the site is, because Modern Huntsman's pretty much consumed my life, but yeah, I definitely still have a lot of stuff up there from the good old days. So
yeah, you have kind of like this. You have different themes, I guess, and you just got to go check it out. I can't explain it to you. I would just butcher it, and make Tyler look really bad probably if I tried to explain what it is. But you take some incredible photos. I use photography as a hobby, since I'm from a young age. And I have to do certain things. Shooting wildlife is one of my favorite things to do. But when it comes to like composing a picture or composition, rather, framing a photo, do you have a certain mindset or, a ritual that you kind of stick to, or some rules that kind of help you with that? Or is it just kind of on the fly?
Not really. I feel like I'm not good at answering questions like this, but I use the example of when photography became really interesting to me I think it was actually the first photography class I took in college. It was a, basic black and white film photography class. And our teacher did this interesting exercise where he set up a still life and all 15 or 20 of us photographed the same thing. And we were all like, oh, this is stupid. Like, this is going to be boring and whatever. But the point of the exercise was to show how different everyone's interpretation of the same thing is. And that's kind of when it clicked to me. And, pun intended there. But I think that for me, it became interesting to just follow your instincts, right? And so I don't really have a technical application, and then I understand the techniques of photography and could tell you, depending on what time of day it was and what film speed it was, what your settings should be. I definitely know that stuff too. But I think it's just that's when I've been asked before, it's more of understanding what you really love and what you're passionate about doing, and getting drawn to that and trusting your instincts and not letting somebody else's opinion of how photos should be taken influence too greatly the way you want to make pictures. Because ultimately, I remember that, and I almost got burned out because I was going to these workshops and I was having people look at my portfolios and they were saying kind of awful things that definitely didn't make me feel good about doing photography. And then I remembered thinking like, well, you know what? I don't care, honestly, because I like these, and they obviously have a very different style, and they're judging what I'm doing based on what they want. And some of these were magazine editors, and they're looking for very specific stuff. So I think that, ultimately that comes down to what you love to do and knowing what you want to create. I think being able to narrow down not only the subject matter, but the style of image you're trying to create. And so I think that for me, it was very much, I don't want to say that my photography is nostalgic, but kind of. There's like a slight...
I could see that feel.
There's like a slight romantic, days gone by kind of vibe to it, if I had to describe it. And so I think, and a lot of that's Americana, right? I mean, I spent a lot of time in the American West, like trying to find this cool stuff that makes me think that the world's more magical than it actually is. And there's magic out there, and you can find it. And I think that's kind of maybe that's the answer, right?
Sure.
Trying to find the magic.
Well, and I think it kind of shows like the iconic brands that you've shot for, like Stetson and some of these other brands that are just huge, and what they encapsulate. It definitely shows through on that as well. So,
yeah, I've never really thought about that. Maybe.
Yeah. What are you working on currently? Do you have any big projects coming up, or any big stuff we should know about to watch for in the future?
I don't. Wow, the rain's really picking up. I don't really have much of a freelance career anymore. It's 100% Modern Huntsman all the time. So we're working on this. We're working on promoting Volume 7, right? It literally just started shipping in the last few days. So if anything I've said today resonates in any way, I sure would appreciate the support there. But the next one, we're already into the next book, which will be focused around Africa, which is my main passion and what has had such a profound impact on my life and my work. And so. And it's the same for Byron. Like, his parents are originally from Zimbabwe, and he spent just as much, if not more, time than me over there. So that's really the next thing is that. And but we're launching a new website here in the next month with a tiered publishing tiered subscription service. So we're going to be offering a lot more because that's a common request over the years is, we love your books and we read through them, but then we don't want to wait 6 months for the next one. So we're trying to do better at publishing more work of the same quality online, through the podcast, through films and things like that. So we're very, very close to rolling that out. So I would say that's been, all consuming for the most part. But I'm really excited about it because if, when we continue to grow it and we get enough subscribers, that it's going to allow me and our team to just focus on what we love and what we're good at, which is talking about these amazing places and people that we meet. And, I used to be pretty diligent about a newsletter and all that, but it's kind of fallen by the wayside. And this would be an opportunity for me to be, once a month, twice a month, maybe even once a week, sending out, something that I've written about where I'm at. I mean, similar to the Mozambique update I just gave you, but it would be coming out through our,
Sure.
subscriber platform on the website, and Byron's doing interesting stuff. We've got so many just amazing people in our family that we need to be sharing more of that. So that's kind of the next big thing is rolling out a lot more of these stories and recipes and all that kind of stuff. So.
Well, I love what you guys are doing, and I really appreciate your time. And, just to be clear, you guys don't have corporate sponsors for Modern Huntsman, so it's strictly pretty much primarily up to the readers to subscribe, that sort of thing, right? So we can keep this thing going.
Yeah, I mean, we do have partnerships with brands, but we don't do ads. So we do
Correct.
Partnerships where we basically work with this brand for either 6 months or a year. We shoot it all, we write it all, we control the look and feel and tone of it. And we don't really partner with brands unless they align with our mission and what we're doing. And, brands like Mystery Ranch and First Light and people like that have been amazing sources of support and inspiration to us. And so, but no, this, other than that, right, and everybody knows the deal, like this is very much a reader supported thing, and so that's what helps keep us going. And so the more subscribers and readers we have, the less, not that we don't want to continue to work with brands, because we always will. There's great brands doing great things, but I think that ultimately the point of this is to be able to tell the stories we want to tell and just provide great stories.
You guys are definitely doing that. Is there anything else that you want to bring up before we jump off here? I know I don't want to chew up too much of your time here, so.
Not really, honestly. I mean, we've covered a pretty good range. I would just say that even though a lot of people aren't readers per se, that I think that if you're on the fence about anything I've said, or that if you're considering it, it's one thing to read about it on the website. It's another thing to actually hold the book. And just as me being a fan of printed things, right? We've gone above and beyond to really make sure that this is one of the best printed publications out there, not just in the hunting industry, but in
And I can attest
general.
to that. The quality of holding it in your hand, the paper size, all that, thickness, all that stuff. Yeah. It's high quality for sure.
Yeah. So I don't want to, I know that's sort of a shameless plug, but I think that it's something that we're up against a lot, right? As we talk
Sure.
about all this stuff, and there's a lot of people who follow the account or say, hey, we love what you're doing. And then I'll say, well, do you have one of the books? And they say no. And, then I kind of give them shit about it. So this is me,
Right.
Giving anyone else shit who's thought about it and hasn't ordered one. Do it.
Absolutely. Help support these guys. Help support this team and everything that they're doing. Because I think it's a great face for hunting. It's a great face for conservation, to ensure it for the future. So I really appreciate what you guys are doing. I value what you guys are doing. And anytime you want to come back on here, Tyler, you got a seat, man. So
awesome.
Or any of your team
I appreciate
as well.
it. No, we definitely. Byron's way smarter than me, and he's got a cool Scottish accent, so he should be the next one for sure.
Man,
but
anytime. Well, we'll keep doing this. I know it feels very short, and we could have gone, for hours on end, I'm sure. But that's why we do more episodes. So
absolutely.
So stay tuned in, everybody. Tyler, go ahead. Let's drop your websites, Instagrams, all that sort of stuff.
Sure.
Go follow these guys. That helps them out too. So
awesome. Thank you. Yeah, the website's modernhuntsman.com. Instagram's @modernhuntsman. And then I can't promise I'll be posting very often on my own Instagram, but it's @TylerSharpPhoto. So maybe that'll keep me on the hook to keep posting stuff on there.
Excellent. Well, thanks again for your time, Tyler. Stay out of the rain, stay dry, and hopefully it puts those fires out for you guys. So,
thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, man. Absolutely.
Thanks, everybody, for listening.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Mountainside Podcast. If you haven't had a chance to do this already, please take a moment, follow, like, subscribe, or rate on whatever platform you catch the Mountainside Podcast at. Also, if you'd like some more information on upcoming episodes, safety tips, access to all of our affiliates, and all the badass discounts that we get here at the Mountainside Podcast, check out themountainsidepodcast.com. We wanted to let you know that the Mountainside Podcast is now available on Patreon. If you'd like access to bonus footage, behind-the-scenes content, ad-free listening, and much more, simply find the link in our bio or visit patreon.com/themountainside. This episode is brought to you by Uncanny CBD. They are a brand new sponsor here at the Mountainside Podcast, and I couldn't be more thrilled about our new partnership. And it's because of what this company does, what they stand for, and who they give back to. Uncanny is an incredible Colorado-based company that's veteran-owned and operated, giving back to the veteran, active military, and first responder communities. They have a wide array of products, whether you're looking for full spectrum or broad spectrum CBD. Uncanny has got you covered with everything from tinctures to isolates, soft gels, gummies, topical CBD, and much more. They make an outstanding product that you truly have to check out for yourself. We've made it super simple for you to check out their website. You can simply open the show notes now and click a direct link, or visit uncanny.com to check out everything that Uncanny has to offer. And listen up, because you are a Mountainside listener, you can receive 10% off every time that you visit Uncanny just by simply using promo code TMS at checkout. Once again, that's promo code TMS at uncanny.com. We are also brought to you by Onnit. Onnit is an amazing company based right here in the USA, helping humans reach peak performance mentally and physically. Listen, this is not just another supplement company with the same old, same old. Onnit's diverse lineup of products and supplements are backed by science and research, and that's what truly makes this company so amazing. Onnit offers supplements to help sports performance, energy levels, your mood, sleep, brain function, focus, immune system, digestive health, and that's not all. Onnit also has amazing fitness programs, equipment, apparel, and you can now save 10% on all of it. Just visit onnit.com, that's ONNIT.com, and use the promo code TMS at checkout to receive 10% off your entire order.